Hi, I'm Michael Close. I'm an artist, a designer, an actor, a writer. My parents come from Macedonia. My mother came from the Aegean part near Florina, what we know as Lerin, from a village called Tercia. And she left Greece because of the Greek Civil War, and came to Canada. And my father, on the other hand, came from Bulgaria with roots to Sveti Nikolae in what is the Republic. He had to leave because he was threatened with the communist concentration camps that were set up 3 times, and he figured that he better get out, and that started a long process of his travel to Canada. And both my mother and father met in Toronto, where they married. I was born in the inner city of Toronto. My name then was Metodi Staminov. And we were living, when I was an infant, in the Regent Park area. And we lived in Corktown and other areas around that place. And it was back then a very, very hard and violent area of Toronto. Some of the earliest memories I have, I would say a large number of them are unpleasant, because it was a very tough place inside and outside of the home. And but there were some experiences that were exceptionally important to me, lifelong, and one of them was seeing the Pieta scaled down version of Michelangelo's sculpture at St. Paul's Catholic Church at Parliament and Queen Street. It sort of inspired me even as a kid, and I even now think that was a very unusual thing to happen. Also, my father was an amateur painter, and I remember him in the kitchen painting, and the smell of the oil paint with turpentine kind of reminded me of lemon, the smell of lemon, and it still does. So there were some good experiences back then. My brother was born about 1.5 years after. He was called Bojidar, but later on he chose Robert. And he's a well-known photographer, Robert Staminov. And yeah, he's very talented. In 1959, my father went back to Bulgaria on a visit. And that was the last we saw of him for many, many years. And in fact, we did not know if he was alive or dead for all that time. And it was very hard on my mother, raising 2 boys on her own, being an immigrant woman. At one point, she even went to the government for help, and she used to say my lifelong with her that they just told her that she was young, so go out and work, they told her. And in fact, she did work. She worked 2 jobs at one time for 5 years. So it was very hard for her. In 1962, my mother got us out of the inner city of Toronto and moved us to East York. I recall her going to different places, rental units, and being turned down because she had children with her. And of course, back then, it didn't really matter, whatever the landlord wanted. So it was a complete shock to me when we arrived in East York one day to a house that turned out to be our own house, and it was like a palace, and it was just fantastic. Well, when I was 6 years old, I asked my mother and uncle if I could shine shoes, and they turned me down. They thought it was too dangerous. And I still, believe it or not, have a vision in my mind of the green shoebox that I imagined that I would have to do the work. When I was 8 years old, at that time we had moved to East York, I started working on a paper route for the Globe and Mail, and I was making $3 a week. When I turned about 12 or 13, I recall writing checks for my mother to pay the mortgage, which was, believe it or not, $75 a month. Now, through my various jobs that I had, like delivery boys, etc., I was paying $20 to $25 a month towards the mortgage. In one of these jobs, by the way, I was working 5 hours a day, 5 days a week after school to make my money. And that was a tough one, physically very, very tough. It was for a dry cleaning company, and we used to collect the soiled clothing from clients from apartment buildings. So at the end of the building, like the bag that I used to carry the clothing in was heavier and bigger than I was. When I turned 16, I joined the Reserve Army as a Royal Canadian Engineer, and I was in it for 3 years. And I got to travel and even trained with the regular forces in Germany, in Lahr, West Germany at the time. And it was a very important part of my life experience. It gave me self-discipline, which I needed, I felt, at that time. Art has always been a strong influence in my life, a strong driving force. But my high school art teacher was a real encouragement for me. His name was Paul Mostovac, of Croatian origins. And he supported me with words of encouragement, with materials, and I owe him a great debt of gratitude. I developed from that point in high school primarily into painting and drawing, although I have done sculpture over the years. The person who inspired me the most was my high school art teacher, the late Paul Mostovac. Paul was of a Croatian background, and he was very encouraging. He helped me with materials, and so I developed into the areas of painting and drawing primarily, and with some sculpture along the way. Also, while at high school, I won the Ruby Kincaid Memorial Scholarship for Art, and it was presented to me by Elizabeth Stavro, and it helped me pay for the first year of my study at the Ontario College of Art. So it was quite a momentous time for me. My first showing was at Westwood Junior High School, where I presented some oil paintings that I had done, and I even did a demonstration of oil painting. And I actually sold my first pieces then. I was 15 years old. Well, my first professional gig in the entertainment business was at CBC around 1979, and it was primarily as a scenic artist, and but I did do graphics work. Later on, I did some design work as well. But in the beginning, I worked on shows like The Gentle Giant, Mr. Dress-Up, Wayne and Schuster, Reach for the Top, Fraggle Rock, Flappers. There's quite a few. My first show in Macedonia was in 1985 in Skopje at Daud Pasha Hamam, which is the National Gallery of Macedonia. Well, my first show actually came about because of a trip to Macedonia in 1984 with John Evans, and we were doing research for Oro Macedonsko, and through the process I made friends with people in Skopje that suggested that I have an art exhibit the following year, which I did. And at the National Gallery, it is the highest level gallery in the country. It is quite an amazing place, and if you ever go to Skopje, you should visit. I had full media coverage. The works that I presented were abstract, canvases and works on paper. I had Peter Mazev, the leading abstract painter of Macedonia, open the exhibition. It was just an amazing experience. And it set a precedent for showing at national galleries of other countries around the world since then. Well, I had a dream in the early 80s about being in a car with a man beside me to my left. And we were driving along, and I could see out the window towards my left, past the man, two bridges go by side, and then there was a tree that had died, and it's about 30 feet high, and no bark on it. It was white. And the man beside me says, yeah, I cut that tree. Oh, okay. And then we started going down a hill, and towards the bottom of the hill we started turning to the left, and there was an old grandmother there dressed in black and carrying kindling on her shoulder, very thin branches. And you could see that she had been a very beautiful woman when she was young, by her face. And after that, in the dream, I found myself sitting at a table with a man across from me, a man to my right, and a woman to my left. And in the dream, I could hear this clicking sound, like, and I saw that it was the woman making that noise, and it seemed to get louder, and it annoyed me to the point that I got angry, and it caused me to wake up. So after I had that dream, in reality, I went to my mother and talked to her about whether my father had been a lumberjack, and she didn't know. Around 1983, I received a Christmas card from my father, and it was a shock because I didn't know if he was alive or dead for all that time since I was a boy. And all of a sudden there's this message, this card from my father, and it really made me think. In 1984, I went with John Evans to Skopje, Macedonia, to do some research for a project called Oro Makedonsko. And since I knew I was going to Macedonia, I thought that it would be a good idea to get a transit visa for Bulgaria, just in case I had some time to be able to visit and perhaps find my father.
How did you begin your search?
After our work with Oro Makedonsko was done, I had some free time and went into Bulgaria. An elderly couple that I met suggested that I go to the postmaster, since I had the address of where my father lived, but I didn't know the area, and I asked for some help on trying to locate my father, and the postmaster was very kind, and through a contact of his, he was able to connect to my father and get back to me and tell me that my father was happy that I was there and he wanted to see me.
What happened once you arrived at a checkpoint?
I took a taxi from Kustendil to where I thought my father was living, near Chudenci, on the Bulgarian-Yugoslavian frontier. And before I got there, I was stopped at a military checkpoint and placed under guard. At that point, the commandant, who was trying to phone the Minister of Defense of Bulgaria to find out what to do with me, my father was able to come out and see me. And he kissed me, and he said to me, the first 20 years were the hardest. My father and I went along together to my uncle's place in Kustendil, where we spent the night. I met my uncle and cousins that I had no idea existed until that point. It was a very emotional time for me. I had a lot of baggage growing up as a boy and a young man without my father around. I had a lot of questions. My father and I went to a restaurant for dinner, and I remember that they brought out the rakia 40-ouncer. And I thought to myself, man, I could drink this and I would be stone cold sober because I have to ask this man some questions. And I did. I asked, Father, why did you come back to Bulgaria? And he said, I came back because the family had property. And I wanted to liquidate some and bring the money back to Canada. And I just didn't believe him. Anyways, in 1990, when communism fell in Bulgaria, my father showed up on my doorstep in Toronto. And we took him in for 12 years until he died. It is great to be able to share my artistic freedom with my Macedonian wife, Menka.
I met Michael in 1987 in Ohrid, Macedonia, when he was visiting Macedonia, and he had exhibition in the National Gallery in Skopje. So he decided to come in Ohrid and visit. Ohrid is a very beautiful tourist destination, and I was working in the public gallery called Gligor Perlucha for House of Culture, and that was maybe kind of luck for him and for me, and we met in my place, and after that Mike left for Canada. I stayed in Macedonia, and we start communicating. I would say they were not very kind of happy circumstances or time, because in that time was the time when Yugoslavia, the old Yugoslavia, started to fell apart. So I was in a kind of time that I have to think about if I need to stay or I have to leave the country, because we were in communication with Mike, and we kind of decide to see if we can continue together, and it was up to me to decide if I will be leaving my country and my family and my profession and come to Canada and see and start a new life and being together and making something that probably can lead to something else. I arrived in Canada in 1992 in May, and Michael and I married in June 1992, the same year. And personally, I would say I felt very sad that I left my country, and it was not hard. I mean, it was hard for me to start thinking that I have left them behind, and I now have to be in the new country. But and also I didn't speak English. I speak a little bit, but not enough for communication. But also I felt a little bit better because his family was speaking Macedonian, and he speaks Macedonian a little bit. So it was a good, like a little bit amount of time to adjust for me. Despite the struggle of emigration and coming to another country, I was kind of lucky to have opportunity because my profession was art historian and curator, and Mike was artist. We had something in common that we can build on it. So we collaborate on many projects, most of them internationally, and we will keep building it one by one, starting from very little and then just go ahead. And also it was not just personal connection and doing exhibition. We also had passion that by using art we wanted to connect the people around the world. Despite working on our projects professionally, we also decided to have a family. So we have Alexandra, the first daughter. She was born 1993, and then Melanie 1996. So soon, even if they were small and very young, we wanted them to come with us, so we were taking them with us on all our projects internationally.
I am continuing with the arts. This summer, Menka and I will be going to Macedonia, and there are shows in Kumanovo and Sveti Nikolae. And what I like about Sveti Nikolae is that it is the hometown of my father's family, where they lived during Ottoman Empire times. And when I get back to Canada, I plan to work as a production designer on a TV series. I wanted to share my story to show creative people that through perseverance, hope, and dreams, that one can accomplish remarkable things. And certainly, my Macedonian background has been a real strength in those pursuits. On a personal level, having a family with a wonderful wife, Menka, and two beautiful and talented daughters, Alexandra and Melanie, is a real highlight. On a professional level, having over 130 solo exhibitions with something like 20 at National Gallery levels or higher of other countries, like the show I had in Cairo in 2005. Plus, working in film, television, and theater for over 40 years. Not bad for a poor boy from Regent Park.